Hello there, boys and girls. You guys are in for a treat today because today what we're going to be reading is we'll be reading actually four chapters, starting with chapter 21 called Crossing the Bridge, and the time frame is 12:15 p.m. Now, because the other three characters were all during 12 o'clock p.m., now let's figure out who this chapter is going to be about. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 21, Crossing the Bridge, 12:15 p.m. Alex, where are we going? Alex wasn't sure. His feet seemed to have a mind of their own. Nunu held Alex tightly by the hand as he marched on, jaw clenched. He was carrying her backpack now, wearing it across his chest and his own on his back, but she still had to walk fast to keep up. Radar trotted along on his other side, bandaged but none the worse for wear. Alex, Nunu tugged at his hand. Alex stopped walking, staring in surprise as he saw where his feet had brought him. They were coming up to the bridge, the tall one they crossed on the bus ride to school every morning, the one that let him see all the way to Manhattan. Now, remember when he was on the bus that morning and he was crossing the bridge earlier on the bus on the way to school? And he had mentioned that that was one of his favorite things to look at, is to look over the bridge at the skyline of Manhattan, and how he loved that view. But I bet you now it's going to look a little different because you're not going to see the twin towers that are standing side by side anymore. So it's going to look different. Let's turn the page and see what he sees. Up ahead, policemen on horse clip-clopped across the bridge, eyeing every car that passed, checking the terrain below. Two more police cars drove slowly by. They paused briefly for the officers to exchange a few words with the men on horseback and then moved on. Before he'd gone to the vet's office, Alex hadn't noticed the heavy police presence on the streets. Now he saw them all over town, like they were on high alert or something. Alex? Nunu sounded impatient. You said we'd go home after. Alex waited for the police to move on. He was afraid they might not let the kids on the bridge. He realized why he was here. He had to see for himself. When the police were out of sight, he set the backpacks down beside Nunu. Wait here. Don't move. You too, Radar. Stay. Radar sat down obediently. Nunu looked frustrated but leaned on the guardrail next to Radar. Alex kept his eyes down as he made his way to the center of the bridge, the highest spot. Then he slowly lifted his head to face Manhattan. The twin towers were gone. Where they once stood, a huge cloud of smoke and dust billowed up from the ground and trailed off to the east. Alex stared. It didn't seem possible. He held up two fingers. Where the tower should be, trying to fix the view, trying to make it right. He felt dizzy and gripped the railing tightly. Somewhere under that smoke was his dad. He remembered the last time he'd seen his father, last night, in the dark, at the bedroom door. I hate you, Alex had said. Alex heard the words in his head and shivered. His father was in trouble, and Alex knew why. He'd said the ugliest thing possible to his dad, and now he was paying the price. The universe was evening the score. This is all my fault, he whispered. Alex continued to stare at the broken skyline. His mind raced as he struggled to think of a way out of this. He had to undo the damage and bring his father home. What did I do? Okay, let's stop right there for a second before we go back to the book. Sometimes people think that their actions cause another reaction, when in reality, this obviously had nothing to do with the words that Alex said to his dad the night before. I mean, those terrorists already had in their plans that they were going to attack the trade centers way before this Alex ever spoke that to his dad the night before. However, in a kid's mind, they're going to think that what they said might have caused all this to happen. He had remorse, he had guilt, he felt like this is all his fault, when in fact we know it's not. But he feels desperately upset and angry and hurt that he would actually speak those words to his father, not realizing those were the last words that he may have actually said to his dad, that his dad might have heard from him. which is why Alex is going to have to do something to try to make it right. And so that's why he said in this last paragraph, he had to undo the damage and bring his father home. So let's see what he decides to do. Radar whimpered and licked his hand. The dog had come to his side, like the answer to a question. Alex stared down at his new best friend. And then a deal began to take shape in his head. He ran it forwards and backwards. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He was going to have to give up something big, big enough to make up for what he'd done, big enough to bring his father home. He was going to have to make a tremendous sacrifice. He was going to have to give up Radar. Wow. Remember how we got the address from the vet? I think he's going to probably head and try to find that address and see where it takes Radar. Okay, here we go. Let's go to chapter 22. It's called New Deal. The time is 12:15. Now, if we look back at the chapter we just began, it also was 12:15. That was Alex's view. Now let's go to New Deal, chapter 22, 12:15. It looks like it's going to be Mac's view now. Max closed his eyes and made another deal. If he stopped watching the news, the phone would ring. Oh my goodness, doesn't it sound like Mac and Alex actually have a lot in common? It sounds like they both try to make deals with the universe to make things right. Okay, let's keep going. He'd been sitting there all morning glued to the TV. Now he turned away from the disturbing news report and forced himself to stare at the phone, trying to make it ring. The phone didn't ring. He was on the sofa in the den, in his usual spot on the right-hand end. Bobby always sat on the left. Most nights after Dottie was in bed, Bobby would join Mac there on the sofa to watch the nightly news. It felt wrong to Mac to be sitting here without Bobby by his side. He continued to stare at the phone. The phone didn't ring. Maybe I need to shake things up, he thought. He got up and walked around the house. He turned off the coffee pot. He looked in on Dottie. He walked out to the porch. He glanced up and down the empty street, came inside, and wound up right back where he started, on the couch. As he settled into his usual spot, he glanced over at Bobby's side of the sofa. They'd sat there so many nights that the empty sofa cushion still held the shape of their bodies like a memory. Max slid over into Bobby's spot. He enjoyed the strangeness of sitting in the wrong seat, and then feeling his son's presence as the cushion molded around him and held him close. He could see the phone out of the corner of his eye, but forced himself not to look. This was his new deal. If he didn't look, the phone would ring. He imagined the call he felt sure would come soon. The phone would ring, he'd answer, and then he'd hear two words, "Hi, Pop." The thought made him smile. It wouldn't be long now. Chapter 23, Whirlwind. So this looks like it's about 8 minutes past the last time that we were with Alex and Nunu. Where are we going? Nunu struggled to keep up as Alex led them through town. We're taking Radar home. Our home? His home, Alex replied through clenched teeth. But why? Alex groaned inside. The why game again. Because I have to. But you just got him. I know. Don't you want to keep him? Duh. Then why? He knew if he tried to say it out loud, it wouldn't make any sense. Besides, how could he tell anyone the truth that all of this was his fault? I have to. But why? I just have to, okay? Nunu frowned. Her brother wasn't making any sense. Alex glared at her, wishing she'd just be quiet and leave him alone. The more questions she asked, the worse he felt. And if she asked one more question, he just might tell her everything. A blizzard of papers whirled around Alex and Nunu. Wow, I love that metaphor. Did you read that? A blizzard of papers. Instead of just saying papers whirled around Alex and Nunu, the author, Tom Rogers, used the metaphor, a blizzard of papers. That lets me visualize just a bunch of papers just flying around. Radar was furiously swinging Alex's backpack in his mouth, shaking it like a rag doll, spilling notebook paper and sheets of homework everywhere. Alex made no move to stop him, not when they had so little time left together. He just watched as a whirlwind of paper swirled around their heads. That's the end of chapter 23. And now let's move into chapter 24. And I want you to see the comparison of Alex and the man in the white shirt. Chapter 24 is called The Man in the White Shirt at 12:23 p.m. Now let's look back at this last chapter. The last chapter started, let me see, chapter 23 was called Whirlwind, and that was at 12:23. And now chapter 24 is also at 12:23. So it's like their times caught up, and this is now going on simultaneously at the same time that Alec is taking Radar back home. Chapter 24, The Man in the White Shirt, 12:23 p.m. The man in the white shirt found himself in a blizzard of memos and printouts, business cards and stationery, paper towels and copy paper swirling through the air. Isn't that amazing how the author had the same metaphor of a blizzard of paper flying around at the same time in two different spots in New York? I just found that fascinating. Okay, continue. Blowing up the street from the south where the towers once stood. So the papers are just flying around. So if you look at it, you got stationery, business cards, printouts, memos. I have to infer that these are probably items of paper that had fallen from the World Trade Center, and they're just like floating through the street because they're not housed in the World Trade Center anymore, and it's just debris that's cluttering the street. Strangely, it reminded him of a ticker tape parade he'd gone to a few years ago when the Yankees won the World Series. He'd taken off work, made it a father-son outing. He smiled at the memory. It was one of their best days together. The sound of breaking glass cut into his thoughts. He'd stepped on a picture frame, someone's family photo, a father and a son. How had it landed here, so many blocks away? Did someone drop it while running? Or had it been hurled all this distance? He lifted the photo and leaned it against a building where someone could find it if they came looking. He knew it was pointless, but he just couldn't leave the family behind on the pavement. As he straightened up, he caught a glimpse of himself in a store window. A gray ghost stared back. When he left home that morning, he was wearing a white shirt and dark pants and shoes. Now he was coated top to bottom with ash and soot. His hair, his face, even his eyelashes were coated in a fine gray powder. He slapped at his pants, trying to knock out the dust. He noticed that even though the pants were now the color of old snow, somehow the crease held its line, and where the fabric was creased, no dust clung to it. He couldn't stop staring at that razor-sharp line. It seemed so out of place, a reminder of how normal and ordinary his life had been when he left home this morning. And that's the end of chapter 24. So now we're seeing three different storylines all happening at the same time. Mac, who's just waiting for his son Bobby to come home or call to say that he's okay from the World Trade Center. And then we have Alec, who is trying to get the dog Radar back home to his owner, so that way he feels like he'll make everything right, and maybe his dad would come home because he made things right by returning the dog that didn't belong to him. And then we have the man in the white shirt at the exact same time. And he is realizing what he's looking like when he sees his reflection in a window of how he's covered from head to foot in soot. All right, we will pick up tomorrow with chapter 25 called Ghosts. Talk to you later. Bye.